but I think something that applies to what a lot of people are participating in these days are protests.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the rights of citizens when they're protesting?
Right. So everyone has a First Amendment right to be able to participate in a protest. And even if your message or your position that you are taking doesn't, the government's not in agreement with that, you cannot be penalized for that. Now, that's the opposite of what we've been seeing. We've seen the Trump administration in terms of immigrants picking them up because somebody wrote an op-ed piece and sending them to a detention center or sending them to prisons. We've seen attempts, even at the University of Michigan has come up with this very draconian policy. Some of the protesters against the Israeli Gaza war have been suspended from school and not being permitted to be on campus, not only U of M's, the main campus, but also any auxiliary campus. And we filed a lawsuit challenging that policy. So this idea, one of the founding principles of our country is that I might not agree with your speech, but I will defend your right to have that speech. And the way we discuss, we present our point of view, but we don't penalize people for exercising those rights. So governments can have certain zoning ordinances about where, in the time and place and manner of where you can protest, but they can't unilaterally or just decide to arrest people because of the nature of the protest. Now, if somebody's engaging in violent behavior, which could happen at a protest, could happen any place, obviously that's something different. And we've seen, efforts. And so, in other words, what we're also seeing this administration is they're putting pressure on college campuses to crack down on a particular political viewpoint. If it seems to me the focus is if you take a position against Israel, at least with this administration, you're going to be penalized for that. And that's just wrong. Wherever you stand, you can be the strongest supporter of Israel, but you also defend the right of people to have a different position. Other questions or comments? This is a great discussion. I'm really enjoying hearing what everybody else has to say. Aaron.
Protest and kind of where the line is drawn, but obviously time, place, and manner exists. Where, under whose judgment is it disorderly now? Because I know that's kind of sort of the line. I work in the world of law enforcement and that's, when somebody is being disorderly and disruptive, who decides what that is?
Right.
Where is that line? What does that look like?
Well, it's interesting, right.
Disorderly.
Right. Well, there's usually, we look at other case law or what they've looked at, how do you define what disorderly conduct, but we can't just have, and so for instance, there's an LGBTQ community center on the other side of the state, and they were denied a permit to hold their event in this main park because they were told, last year there was disorderly conduct from opponents that were there. And so they came to talk to us about this. They said, well, there were some people shouting some things, but they didn't prevent the activity from going on. They didn't threaten violence against anybody. And do we want governmental entities to assume because a particular group there's going to be disorderly conduct to deny, by others to be able to deny that permit? So I think, I'm not an expert in this area, but I do think courts have looked at examples what are considered to be disorderly conduct. And I would maintain that people counter-protesting something or shouting things back, that wouldn't meet that threshold to be able to, either charge somebody or deny a group from being able to assemble.
Just
Yeah.
one point.
Sure.
I'm also a member of Wichita, Traverse City Indivisible and Equality
Wonderful.
Michigan.
Yes.
And we have guidelines for safe protesting. And so if you go to any of our websites, you'll find guidelines, for safe protesting techniques and so forth. And we've had 4 pop-up protests here in the last 2 months, and we've had an amazing number of people show up. Your neighbors who you didn't even know show up at the protest, and it's kind of a kick. So, I mean, it's like, for me, 1970 all over again.
That's wonderful. And I'm glad you mentioned about Equality Michigan because we work very closely with them. Equality Michigan is the LGBTQ lobbying organization for the state. And next Wednesday, May the 14th is going to be Lobby Day. And it's the day before there's going to be hearings on the anti-trans healthcare bills. And if anybody has the time and the ability to make a little long road trip to be part of that, that would be great. That would be great. The other thing I wanted to mention too is the ACLU's website also has information about your rights to protest. And there's also an organization called the National Lawyers Guild. And many times what they'll do, if they have people available in a particular area, they will be observers to make sure that people are being treated fairly, that law enforcement is following the letter of the law with regards to those events. Somebody else say, yeah.
So this is sort of, well, I'm just gonna say it. So I've been in those protests and they're wonderful and they build community and you get to know who your community is, that if you're unsure, but and all along, lots of people say, well, if you protest, you know, safely, then nothing's gonna happen to you. But we're seeing everywhere that doesn't apply anymore. I mean, you know what I'm saying? In
Mhm.
general,
Right.
that would never happen, is what people say. That would never happen, and yet it's happened.
Right. Well, I think, yeah.
And so, my personal question is, I'm also a guardian of my brother. And I just was doing my yearly report and on there it says, have you ever been arrested?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, what happens if I got arrested?
Mhm, mhm.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
You know, and and I am being careful, but that doesn't mean that something will happen.
Sure. Well, thank you for bringing this up. And I think you're bringing up a concern we're seeing with this administration. We're seeing people, particularly immigrants, either legally or not legally, being picked up, being taken away without anybody being told where they're going, being sent out of this country. We heard our president make a statement. He'd like to take homegrowns, U.S. citizens. We heard the question about, I think it was from the Department of Justice, could U.S. citizens be deported too? So obviously that gives us pause and concern. The bottom line though is, and I'm hoping that our United States Supreme Court is going to hold firm and make it very explicit that everyone's entitled to due process. Certainly on, with Abrego Garcia in terms of they're going to have a hearing later this month and get more specific, but make it explicitly clear that you can't do this sort of thing. But it is scary. And I know people are concerned about traveling. Could they be stopped at the airport? And, if they have a certain lawn sign on their front lawn, what if, so who knows? I mean, we see these ICE agents, they're not wearing necessarily uniforms and stuff, but we here in Detroit, people being stopped, at stores and things like that, U.S. citizens, and being asked to show their identity documents and being questioned. It is a real concern. But you also bringing up another really good point. That's why it is so important that we have this groundswell of community when people coming out. And, you mentioned about, I spoke at a rally in Dexter. I don't know if people are familiar. It's pretty much a white community, very conservative community, but 400 people showed up. And I can imagine that some of them might identify as politically conservative on some issues, but there's a lot of people that are concerned about some of these things that are happening. And, and it's a challenge because we want to keep this momentum going, and we really don't have a chance to effectively make our stand until November of 2026. That's a long way to go. I don't know about you, but I feel like the last 3 months has felt like 5 years. It's exhausting, right? So, yeah.
So there's a question online
Mhm.
saying, other than the wonderful advice given so far, is there anything specific that those people who will be attending the LGBTQ Advocacy Day in Lansing should know?
Well, I think they have a whole program planned out. Emmy Zanotti, who's the political director, they're going to be talking about the issues. They're going to assign people to visit certain legislators. They'll provide them with talking points. They won't have people having to go all by themselves. They'll go in pairs, and they're going to have some really effective and significant action steps that people can take there. So, and if people can't make that, people have to work, so, other obligations, transportation issues, still can make phone calls or send emails to their elected officials as well. Yeah.
So as someone who'll be representing this area, I'll be at the advocacy day, so people can send things directly to Upworth Pride's info if there's like specific points. I'm happy to be the conduit to take that information along.
That's great. And I wanted to mention too, I hope people don't feel, I don't get up to Traverse City that often. I hope they don't feel this is our last conversation. You can always contact me directly at my email address. Maybe you can make that available. Always feel free to reach out. Even if you don't have a specific legal issue of your own, if just a question about what's happening, because we not only want to be an advocate and attorney, but also want to be a resource to the community. And I remember coming here 30 years ago, and there was no LGBTQ center. And I remember that people, when they had certain events, people would come from 100 miles away just to participate at gatherings, to find a place where they belong. So I'm so thrilled that you do have your center and you have all these wonderful events that are coming up. And that's the other thing I neglected. Another thing all of us can do is support our LGBTQ organizations, support our community center, which does so much good for the community. And all these organizations, none of them are rolling in dough or anything like that. They sometimes it's just spit and polish or whatever just to keep it together. But it's very important that we keep these things, because that signifies our existence, that we do exist, and that we're not going away anyplace either. So, yeah.
One more online question. Have there been any updates on the ACLU court case regarding the group of transgender individuals who are trying to get proper gender markers on their passports?
Yes. So the update on that is the ACLU filed a motion asking the judge, because the judge issued a preliminary injunction on behalf of those 6 plaintiffs. So those 6 plaintiffs can now get a passport that accurately reflects who they are, but that leaves out all the people impacted. So we asked the court, would they expand the injunctive relief to include all people who are impacted? So it'd be transgender people, people who identify as intersex, people who identify as gender non-binary. So we did file that motion last week, and there'll be briefing on it. So litigation, it goes slowly. There'll be briefing on it, and obviously the Trump administration is going to file their response to that. And it's our hope that we'll be able to widen this kind of relief. And one of the things we argued in the case initially was, when you grant this relief, grant it to the whole population. The judge wasn't willing to do so, absent some more specific legal arguments. So that's what we're focusing and emphasizing in our legal brief to the court.
Gender individuals wait
Yes.
then before applying
Yep,
still?
don't apply to get a corrected passport. I mean, if your passport's expiring and you're planning on traveling, you do need to apply. You're not going to get a passport that's going to, reflect who you are. The State Department said that, in terms of transgender people who, let's say you have a current passport that reflects your gender identity, that you're not going to have any problems or harassment when you return to the United States. But once again, as we mentioned earlier tonight, it's going to be a problem for people whose passport doesn't reflect who they are, and in other countries while they're traveling.
Rubio is actually working on this whole passport thing personally.
So what should have happened was there should have been proposed administrative procedures, but they went right ahead. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. Senator Rubio, who is in my opinion, has drunk the Kool-Aid and decided he's all in. What does he have, 4 jobs now or something like that? He's a national archivist. He's head of the National Security Council, right? He's Secretary of State, and he's got his hands all over people's passports. Yeah. Anything else? I want to thank you. I'm so glad that I was able. I'm so happy to be able to do this in person, but also just to have the conversation with all of you. And thank you for your great questions. And I really, I am, despite all the stuff I said to you, I really am a half glass full kind of guy. I know we are going to get through this. It's just, it's a challenging time right now, but I always feel so much better when I see all of you, and I know that it's not just my fight, it's not a couple people's fight, it's all of our fight, and we're in this together. So thank you so much.